Well, he is a published physicist, made some of very famous discoveries. He's seen as a top physicist. And he saw two buildings turn into powdered dust and metal cut off and blown in little pieces. And he saw another building fall in a perfect controlled demolition and the countdown by the police and everybody and firemen. They were told that the government was going to blow it up. And he's gotten samples and tested it. His theory was it would be thermate that could cut through and have explosive power that fast. And sure enough, they got samples, multiple samples, and that's exactly what it is, the exact signature. And we know they did it, and he's now gotten his information published in peer-reviewed, prestigious journals. Engineers have had it as well. And NIST keeps saying they can't say why Building 7 fell. They admit they're looking at bombs. And we are now joined by Professor Stephen Jones. And thanks for coming on, my friend.
It's great to be with you again, Alex.
You've got the floor. Tell us what you want to talk about in the 35 minutes we've got.
Yeah, let me start with a peer-reviewed paper. It was peer-reviewed by 3 reviewers, and it's 14 points. Let's see, what's the rest of it? 14 agreement with official government reports on the World Trade Center destruction. And what we did there, I am an author, a first author, you see, with 4 other authors. You'll know some of these, Kevin Ryan, James Gurley, Tony Zambodi, a mechanical engineer, Frank Legge, an Australia PhD chemist. So what we did is we have, of course, been reading the official government reports on the World Trade Center destruction, and we found areas where they're basically admitting that they're having trouble with the fire-based explanation, fire and damage-based explanation. For example, with World Trade Center 7, and that's the one that caught my attention 3 years ago, you know, when I finally woke up, when a friend nudged me, a couple friends, and I saw World Trade Center 7 come down. Anyway, that's our first point, and there you don't even have the NIST report yet. That's the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It keeps being delayed and promised. I think it's promised again for this month. If I remember, that was late last year. It was supposed to be out again, and they delayed it till this month. Well, we'll see. But, of course, they know we're watching very carefully with what they come up with. Anyway, so we go back to the FEMA report on World Trade Center 7, and there we read that after FEMA tries to explain the collapse of this skyscraper, 47-story skyscraper, on September 11th, then FEMA admits, quote, our best hypothesis has only a low probability of occurrence. Well, who can disagree with that? You know, this is a fire-based hypothesis, and, you know, we just haven't seen skyscrapers come completely down like that ever before or after. So they admit that their fire-based hypothesis is weak, a low probability of occurrence, and so we agree with that. Another example in the paper is the pancaking theory, which was promoted by FEMA, actually, in this case. This is the pancaking floors for the destruction. And Popular Mechanics, very famous or infamous, depending on how you look at it, article. They promoted, of course, this same pancaking theory, as did a NOVA program, the pancaking floor theory of collapse. Then we get to NIST in their lengthy analysis of the collapse. They rule out the pancaking theory, and they say this is not correct, and they go through. And, of course, we agree with NIST. This is the final report then on the towers collapse, and we agree that the pancaking theory needs to be discarded, thrown out. It's not valid. And NIST also talks about the fact that the towers fell in essentially free fall. We agree with that. Of course, they don't explain how that can happen, you know. We do. With controlled demolition, you find essentially free fall for buildings, but they have trouble with that. But at least we agree on the observation that the buildings came down essentially in free fall.
Professor Jones, stay there. Back in 3 quick minutes. Let's walk through your peer-reviewed report that's really upsetting the establishment. But we're talking to Professor Stephen Jones. award-winning physicist who has got done a peer-reviewed report with other top researchers and scientists from their own fields and professionals. There's some other peer-reviewed reports coming out now. And the so-called debunkers who've been caught lying every step of the way, I mean, here's one thing they'll do. They'll say, just everything they say is a lie or a twist, but they'll say, NORAD never intercepted one aircraft in the year before 9/11 except Payne Stewart. And then you go pull Reuters up, and you see the same major, who's their spokesman, who they're quoting in Popular Mechanics, but you actually go look at the article. He says we had 167 intercepts in that same year where the planes, F-16s, were sent up. I mean, any pilot out there knows that all the time, pilots that get off course flying around the storm, who fly over a military base or controlled area, they launch F-16s on you, they direct you down, they threaten to arrest you. Sometimes they do. But they just lie and say, and I called in with Meggs, the head of the father of yellow journalism, Hearst Publishing, also on History Channel that did the hit piece on us, very deceptive, and, filmed me for days and days and days and finally got me saying, one thing halfway wrong and put that in there, of course. I mean, that's what they do. I called in when he was on another Genesis show, and I said, what about this? And he said, I'm not going to debate you. I'm not going to respond to that. Because they can't, because I know they're a pack of liars. I know what they do. But the general public doesn't. But they kept moving the goalposts. They said, you don't have any scientists or physicists or engineers. And then we gave them hundreds, now thousands. Well, you don't have peer-reviewed journals. Well, those aren't prestigious. Well, now they're in prestigious ones, but... And then the government says they don't know why Building 7 fell. Professor Stephen Jones, continue. Walk through your report. Walk through the findings. Tell us about the other esteemed researchers and scientists that you worked with on this and what it shows us. I mean, this really is a scientific gauntlet. They're still saying the world is flat. But I guess, was it Copernicus that said, no, it's really round, or Galileo that said it went around the sun instead of vice versa? And I mean, they're going to lose this now because they have decided to have a false scientific battle with physics, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. I mean, there's so much evidence now, Alex, and that's, I think, so important from my point of view as a scientist to establish the hard physical evidence. I also think the lack of air defenses that day, there's a great deal of evidence that goes along with that. Of course, Secretary Minetta's testimony, that's evidence.
He's now been interviewed 3 times to confirm that Dick Cheney is lying and that he was in there at 9:10, not 9:40 something like he said, in control and ordering the stand down. 3 separate times he said, no, my testimony was correct. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I agree. These are very important points. And but, I and others called for an impeachment of Richard Cheney, and, boy, I think we need it in spades. Now, there's so much evidence that is built up, not just 9/11, but certainly that's the foundation for a lot of these problems, but the lying about the war in Iraq and so on. People say, well, why don't these insiders blab? Well, they are blabbing. It's just as soon as they do.
O'Neill said months before 9/11, they had all the oil field maps and said, now all we need is an attack.
Right. Yeah, Paul O'Neill. He stood up to, remember Dick Cheney said, deficits don't matter. And Paul O'Neill, Secretary of the Treasury at the time, said, well, they certainly do matter. And he was fired. By whom? Well, by Dick Cheney. This is Paul O'Neill standing up for the truth. Yeah, and so there are insiders that are standing up and that give us this evidence. And there's also another point. Remember the flowing orange flowing material that comes out of the South Tower in large quantities just before it's collapsed.
Oh, and let me stop you. There's disinfo people showing the photo of the big grappling arm pulling up steel, and it's white hot. And if you look, you can see it dripping, but they show a small picture and claim that that's not molten. The thermal imaging from government aircraft, the eyewitnesses, the firefighters, and what we see coming out of the sides of the building all admit molten.
Right.
What do you say to those that say you're lying, there's no molten steel, when the government admits there was molten steel?
See, that's the thing about this paper. The government admits, in particular, this orange flowing material, and they're having a hard time explaining it. They finally admitted it's not aluminum, which is something that I've been saying for a long time.
But the debunkers lie and say that you're lying and that there's no molten metal, knowing most people won't read government reports.
Yeah,